Coleman at Large on Newstalk 106 to 108.
Now, to discuss the very topic of religion and where it's going in this country is Michael Nugent of Atheist Ireland, Michael Kelly of the Irish Catholic, and Donal O'Sullivan Latchford and Bill Tormey. Michael, let me start with your good self. You heard, from your point of view, the great Richard Dawkins was in Dublin yesterday. What did he have to say?
Well, he was talking largely about science at the Dublin Writers' Festival event in the National Concert Hall. He was talking about his life as a scientist, about the various books he's written, some of which are promoting science and some of which are critical of theology and religion. And he came across very well, came across as the gentle, erudite man that he is, and refuted the false impression that people who oppose him put across of him as being somehow strident.
Now, he pointed to the Irish Times poll on religious attitudes, which we're going to talk to Michael Kelly of the Irish Catholic about in a moment. And he suggested that, Catholics who don't believe that the body and, blood of our Lord is present in the communion should actually give up the Catholic faith. But isn't that a bit extreme? I mean, nobody fully adheres to, no one of any religion, or very few people of any religion, fully adheres to all of the tenets of their faith. Doesn't mean they don't believe in that faith.
No, although transubstantiation, which is one of the, from an atheist perspective and from a scientific perspective, one of the most improbable parts of Catholic theology,
according to science,
is a core part of the Catholic faith.
According to science, but faith is not about accepting scientific dogma, no more than scientists accept religious dogma.
Yeah, but you were just arguing a second ago that it didn't matter that they don't believe in it. But there are other things as well, like 8% of people who describe themselves as Roman Catholics in that survey didn't believe in God, which I would have thought would be a reasonably fundamental part of being a Catholic.
Yeah, but I mean, I pay taxes to something called society. I'm not quite sure society exists. I'm not quite sure about this God of the public good that we're all supposed to pay taxes. Unlike you, by the way, I don't have the freedom to opt out of that religious worship of the state and taxation. I actually the secular state forces me to pay taxes. It's a forced religion on people. At least you guys have the choice not to go to Mass, not to participate in religious ceremonies that you don't like.
Yeah, well, you can, obviously everybody has the right to believe whatever they want, and if you choose to believe that the state doesn't exist, you're quite free
it does exist. It's a religion with its own hierarchy and worships and mythology, but unfortunately, unlike the Catholic Church, it forces me to pay taxes to sustain it, even if I don't believe it does any good.
Yeah, well, maybe they should just go. Maybe they should have collections every Sunday.
Maybe. I wonder. Well, they did. They tried that with the household charge, and an increasing number of people don't want to give anymore. Michael Kelly of the Irish Catholic, very, very extensive report in the Irish Times on attitudes to the faith, would suggest on the face of it that Mother Church does not understand her flock anymore.
Or the flock doesn't understand Mother Church is probably another way to look at it. It comes down, I suppose, to you define Catholicism as what the Church teaches or what the faithful believe. If you define it as what the faithful, for want of a better word, believe, then the Irish Times poll and a lot of other recent polls have suggested that the Catholic Church in Ireland is in a lot of trouble. Certainly it is at a great deal of difficulty in communicating the message to those who claim to be within it, some 84%, according to the census. And, on Richard Dawkins' point where he thinks, that Catholics who don't believe in transubstantiation should leave the church, atheists don't really like the idea of kind of lapsed religious people. I think they think they're, 1 foot in the tent, 1 foot out of the tent. They should kind of jump out completely. That's not how religion is for people. People are very complex in their religious views. And I think the Catholic tradition would certainly be, obviously they would like people to believe everything, but they want to meet them where they're at and try to bring them to something. Obviously the figure that 2/3 of Irish Catholics say they don't believe in transubstantiation. That's worrying. It's an important element of the Catholic Church's
understanding. So do you think that report in the Times, that we did ask Patsy McGarry and Cathy Sheridan of the Times onto the show, they weren't able to come on. Do you think they got it fundamentally wrong in any way?
I regret very much to say, Mark, that for the Irish Times, the paper of record, it's increasingly becoming a very unreliable source for Catholic news. I mean, if you look to one report in the paper yesterday, they set out, they go about telling Catholics what it is that you have to believe to be a Catholic. One of the things they say is to be a Catholic, you must adore the Blessed Virgin Mary. Now, that's something that's explicitly forbidden, both by Scripture and by the teaching of the Church.
Pagan idol.
Well, I mean, veneration of the saints, veneration of the Mother of God, but adoration is proper only to God himself. So it's very worrying for a newspaper as important as the Irish Times to take such a cavalier attitude towards religion. And people will say to me, this has been pedantic, you're just thinking about theology. But in a report in Saturday's Irish Times, they seem to confuse transubstantiation as if that meant the same thing as the Eucharist.
Transubstantiation was described to me by an Anglican friend as a rather bad sherry.
Mark, do you believe in transubstantiation?
That is a very deep question. Yes, I do in a metaphysical sense, yes.
And how do you think it happens?
You're asking me to describe it in terms of a scientific process I don't understand, because I don't believe all these phenomena can be understood by scientific method. I have faith that it happens,
right.
But I cannot prove it to you in scientific terms.
That's the whole point of transubstantiation. If you could, it wouldn't be transubstantiation. Right?
Yeah,
because
I like the way Martin Luther put it. I'm a closet Lutheran, really, more than a Catholic. The just shall live by faith alone.
I mean, it comes down to whether or not you accept. It comes down to whether or not you actually accept that there are supernatural phenomena.
Yeah,
and once you accept supernatural phenomena, then it becomes something that's plausible for religious believers.
Absolutely. I mean, Jedward. Some people believe that Jedward, God bless them, have musical talent.
No, I'm listening.
That is a level of belief I respect, but I cannot comprehend.
What I am listening to here is crass intellectual dishonesty.
Really?
Because you've just exhibited crass intellectual dishonesty, because you're afraid of the awful truth that, in fact, if you cannot explain stuff in any sort of semi-rational fashion, and if you can't subject things to scientific evaluation, because you refuse to say that scientific evaluation might somehow or other tunnel its way to the truth in all of this, in these matters, you are being fundamentally dishonest.
No, I'm not.
I'm saying in my
there's a difference
opinion
between facts and truth.
Hold on.
I'm saying that some truth, such as why people love each other, why people believe Andy Warhol is an artist, which completely baffles me.
This is the sort of facetious.
Some truths are not fundamentally cannot be proven by fact. Doesn't mean they're not
what
true.
you're exhibiting is fundamental side door exits and to avoid the awful truth of the fact that what you're saying is inherently absurd.
It's called faith. You have faith in the leadership of Enda Kenny. I can't scientifically prove why you do.
I think that Enda Kenny is a decent skin, and he's probably as good as we're going to get to lead this country at this particular juncture.
And you believe that a party you adhere to?
No, I don't adhere to anything.
To govern the country?
Not necessarily.
Mark, do you believe that Muhammad flew on a winged horse?
No, I wouldn't go that far. I'm not a Muslim, but I respect those who do.
What's the distinction between the two? Why do you believe one and not the other?
Because I was reared in the Roman Catholic Church. I took a good look at it. I compared it with Islam and Judaism, and I decided I was going to stay in.
And why is flying on a winged horse less reasonable than
I'm
turning
not saying
the body?
It's not less reasonable. I never said it was unreasonable. I said it's not the faith that I have.
It's an issue of the faith one adheres to. You're not saying that the claims of other religions are apparently
I want to bring Donal in here. Donal, there was a lot of
absurd.
Well, you piously may believe that if you so wish.
I don't piously believe it at all. I just think it's until such time as somebody could.
I want to bring Donal in here. Let me bring Donal in.
I tell you the reason I hold it.
Bill.
Because it's very destructive not to.
I think it says something for the self-confidence, right, of the Catholic faith, that it is quite comfortable in a conversation like this, where basically, technically you're talking about listening to blasphemy, right? Obviously, blasphemy in Islamic terms would be something which would bring a completely different reaction to the one that we will get from Catholics.
Want to kill you.
Oh, Bill, you have to go. You're going to have to let Donal finish now.
So what I'm saying is,
no, he can do himself. He can
what we have.
Now,
Catholicism is a reasonable faith. We would take pride, if you like, in the fact that it's a reasonable faith, and it can stand up to any taunts, if you like, and there's no...
I want to actually ask you about the last couple of weeks, because I know you take an interest in the media. We've had you on the show in that capacity before. do you think the process of scrutiny by the Oireachtas Committee of Tom Savage over the Kevin Reynolds affair, there's going to be another round of that coming up, do you think all this is getting to the bottom of what you believe is an anti-religious bias in the media?
Well, I would hope that it does eventually, but obviously there's a danger that it's going to end up in a cul-de-sac. I mean, Tom Savage made a very good point. We talked about a perfect storm happened, was a phrase I used myself in relation to the Father Reynolds case and a few other things that were happening in relation to the media. He said that so many fail-safe mechanisms went wrong with that program that he couldn't really be responsible. Now, I think that's almost a side issue. The point is, there is a problem there. Groupthink was a very useful word. It doesn't sum it all up.
Okay.
But
can I bring Michael in here, because there's various ways to cut the cloth here, but I'm looking at the census. If my figures are right, and please correct me if they're wrong, 3,900 or thereabouts describe themselves as atheists on the census. Now, I know you would like to include a larger subset of people who, you know, had not stated or agnostic, but whatever way you cut the numbers, between 0.1 and maybe 2 or 3% of the population have described themselves as varying degrees of non-belief, or at least non-organised religious belief. It's a very small proportion of the population. Would you agree with Fintan O'Toole when he was writing in the Irish Catholic last September that small proportion is very, very overrepresented in the media and the commentariat of our country? That people who sympathise with you are, relatively overrepresented by a multiple, by a several factor multiple in the media.
No, I wouldn't. First of all, the figure for atheists is very misleading, because the question on the census is, what is your religion? Atheism is not a religion. People who are atheists will have answered that question by ticking the no religion box. A small number of people, for whatever reason, choose to write in the word atheist or agnostic or humanist or other phrases like that.
But how do you know the people who tick no religion means they may not have a religion, but they may have a personal belief in God?
You don't.
They may not be Jewish or Catholic or Buddhist, but they may have their own personal belief in God. Doesn't mean they're atheists.
Yeah, that's right. You don't know that. I accept
so
that.
Maybe we should put in.
So the whole question provides misleading answers. I mean, certainly 84%. The 84% that say that they are Roman Catholic include children whose parents have written down the answer for them. It includes people who don't believe in the tenets of Catholicism.
Were you surprised by that figure?
I am the only person I know, Michael, and perhaps I haven't asked my colleagues, but I'm one of the only person that I know who's a regular mass goer in Newstalk. Now, I don't always go to mass. There may be one or two others out there that I don't know about, but the vast majority of my colleagues, other presenters, would not be regular mass goers. Now, regular mass goers are still 1/3, 40% of the population, in terms of they may not go every week, they might go twice a month or something. Fintan O'Toole, one of the few things Fintan O'Toole agrees with me, is that there's a very narrow demographic in the media which is largely over-representative of people of, let's say, a sceptical attitude towards religion. You don't even accept Fintan O'Toole saying
if you take the 1/3 that attend Mass once a week or more, that breaks down into 2/3 of the over 65s and only 13% of 18 to 25s. So the trend is very much moving generationally towards less and less people.
But as Winston Churchill said, or was it George Bernard Shaw, people become more conservative as they get older.
Yeah.
If you went back 40 years ago, you would have found a similar pattern.
And I don't know, Michael, if you've been to a political party event recently. I'm sure Dr. Tormey will agree with me. There's precious few young people hanging around that as well. I mean, there's a certain sense people, when they're younger, they don't particularly engage with certain things. I think religion is one of them. Politics is another one of them. It doesn't mean that they don't engage when they become older.
Yeah. I will bring Bill in on that topic and be reading out your texts. Keep them coming in on 53106 at 30 cents a text. First, we have to take a short break. Stay with us.
Coleman at Large on Newstalk 106 to 108.
Welcome back to Coleman at Large, and I'm in studio with Michael Nugent of Atheist Ireland, Michael Kelly of the Irish Catholic, Donal O'Sullivan Latchford, and Bill Tormey. And we're going to be talking about the Eucharistic Congress now. Some of your texts, we'll hold the texts over for the moment. Michael, the Eucharistic Congress, the International Eucharistic Congress, is it a rallying of the troops? Is the rest of the Roman Catholic Church coming to the aid of an Irish church that's badly in need of a morale boost, or what is it?
Well, it's going to be the largest religious event in the country since Pope John Paul II visited in 1979. Obviously, it's a very different scale. We're talking about 80,000 people in Croke Park for the final closing mass, about 10,000 Catholics coming from overseas. I think this is a good opportunity for Irish Catholics to see the universality of the Catholic Church. Sometimes we're very inward-looking in Ireland, not just in religion, but I think it's particularly marked in the Catholic Church, and there are various reasons for that, but it's an opportunity to see a vibrant church from overseas, see people coming from other countries. I think this has to be seen in the context as well as giving a bit of a shot in the arm to the church. On the face of it, given the corruption, the crimes that have taken place within the Catholic Church in this country, the Catholic Church should be finished. It's not. We still have a third of our people who go to Mass every week. That's a remarkable figure. In the Pope's own Diocese of Rome, it's about 12%. So actually the Catholic Church in Ireland is in remarkably good shape. Now, as the Archbishop of Dublin has said, they can never go back to business as usual. What has been perpetrated in the Catholic Church.
You see, I have to be honest with you. I have heard very senior media editors, respected media people, tell me that as far as they are concerned, I've heard Helen Buckley of the Ferns Committee say that, look, serious as they are and must be covered, the proportion of clerical abuse is a small proportion of the total abuse committed, and she doesn't demean the importance or gravity of it. But what she says is, why therefore is the vast majority of news coverage focused on clerical? And the answer I have got from several senior editors is, we have to get the church because its position on abortion and other issues is way out of line with modernity, and it has to be attacked.
There's a very strong...
in other words, the reason for covering it could be argued is very flawed.
I think that's true to a certain extent. I think the media played an important role in highlighting these issues, of course, but the question we do have to ask is, why are feelings in other institutions, feeling in the HSE, for example, not given the same media spotlight? I mean, we know the public vastly overestimate the number of priests who have been guilty of abuse, and that has got to be down, in my view, to the overemphasis
and one
of
case
it in the media.
One case too many.
Of
the
course.
question I don't understand is why...
partly what you're dealing with is the over-dominance that the Church had in Ireland in the past, so people feel
we
they
were
have to
living
bring
in a
that down.
theocracy for a long time.
What is a theocracy,
A
Bill?
theocracy is a country run by a state run by a religious elite, and we were actually in that position here with all major social services run by that theocracy.
Because the state, which could have
I'm not going to go into we were. I'm not talking about how we got there, just we were.
We don't have a head of state.
Just let me finish, Mark. Hold on.
We don't have a head of state like Britain, which is head of the church.
Is
we do actually. The President of Ireland has to swear a religious oath.
Yeah, that's right. Just
not to one church.
Let me just...
To the Christian God.
The Queen of England, who celebrated her Jubilee in the last few days, has, by definition under the British Constitution, to be head of the Protestant Church of England. Right? That is a theocracy. That is a state church.
Head of the Church of England.
In Ireland, we have had two presidents.
You're actually wrong. Head of the Church of England. There doesn't say
by
the Protestant...
definition, the Church of England is a Protestant faith.
No, it's not.
Read the Act
That's
of
one
Settlement.
of the things. It's not actually.
It is, I'm afraid,
strangely.
Bill.
Coleman at Large on Newstalk 106 to 108.
All right, brilliant point, Donal, says one texter. It's hard to be a young Catholic in Ireland. I'm delighted we can celebrate our faith at the Congress without feeling uncomfortable for a change. It's not the number of priests, says Tony in Navan, it's the obstruction of justice by the Church that angers so many ex-Catholics like myself. Dara is a 17-year-old Catholic. He says that he thinks people who disagree with Catholic teachings but call themselves Catholic would be more honest if they left the church. As for the Eucharist in several places across the world, there have been hosts that have been scientifically examined that had one half comprised of bread and the other of heart cells of a blood type common in the Middle East. Good grief, I didn't know that. True. Sean says Bill is showing his weak liberalism, given that he doesn't know that the fundamental tenet of the Church of England is Protestantism. And Sean says Ireland is currently entering an era of secular fascism. Bill, I have to correct you. If you read the Act of Settlement 1704, you will find that the Church of England and the monarch is explicitly required to uphold the Protestant faith, Bill. I will show it to you. It's black and white.
Yes, but what's the... What
yes, so therefore it's a Protestant church.
The Protestant faith.
Oh, Bill, look, you're getting into semantics now.
No,
the Church of England is a Protestant faith. Read the Act of Settlement.
If you know what's going on in the Anglican religion at the moment, there's a massive schism going on.
It's a separate debate. It's a Protestant faith. Now, how do you leave the church, asks Darren in Galway. I was baptised without my consent when I was a few weeks old and would like to be removed from the records. Apparently it's not easy. Darren, as a taxpayer, I feel exactly the same way you do about the state. Unfortunately, I still have to pay taxes to this state. Michael, how does Darren leave the church? Is there a process?
Well, they did have a process up to recently.
Self-excommunication. How does it work?
They did have a process up to recently where you could contact your local parish or bishop and say that you want to be removed from their records, but they have since removed that process and say that they're going to keep you and that it's not up to you whether you leave or not. They say that even if you are voluntarily decided to become a member of the church, that it doesn't follow from that you can voluntarily leave.
Okay, now we've a tweet here from Ronan O'Dowd, and he says, confusing coverage of abuse within the church and the media with bias towards religion. I don't know what he means by bias towards religion. I was suggesting there was bias against religion, but you wanted to make a point on that.
Yeah, I want to, because this is quite a serious point, because, I mean, to a certain extent, it's entertaining talking about, why you believe the pieces of bread turn into body and blood of Jesus and Muhammad and flying horses, and they're kind of theological entertainments. But there's the very serious issue of children being raped and abused institutionally. And the reason that it is more significant to focus on the Catholic Church than other institutions in that context is not because of the rape and abuse, it's because of the cover-ups. It's because it is an organisation that institutionally facilitated the continuance of it by moving people from parish to parish and from country to country, and wherever around the world the Catholic Church is, you have that problem of
and you will find in cases where there were secular cases of abuse in Sweden, Portugal, a secular socialist government, a TV presenter was involved. There was similar cover-ups. I mean, it is in the nature of that crime, and the families, and the vast majority of this happens in the family. That's cover-up is part of this problem.
That is an utterly morally reprehensible thing to say.
You're saying that it isn't covered up.
I'm saying that what you're saying is
how is it morally reprehensible?
Because an organisation that institutionally lies about and covers up the rape of children.
But I'm not denying that. What I'm saying is that secular institutions have done exactly the same thing. So why is the media, is it not morally reprehensible for the media to say, we will only cover institutional cover-ups in religious cases? Isn't your position morally reprehensible, Michael? Because what you're saying, implying, is that if it's not committed by a religious institution, if a secular institution covers it up, we don't need to cover it as much in the media. Surely it's the suffering, the children that counts, and surely the morally reprehensible position is actually avoiding the vast majority of abuse that happens in the secular world because it doesn't conform to your notions of appropriateness. We should cover all abuse. It's the suffering of children that counts.
I mean, we're downgrading
regardless of who does it.
Of abuse victims. And saying, your
and this is being stated this is being stated, in fairness, Michael, not originally by me, but by Helen Buckley, who has sat on the Ferns Committee report, and who in an Irish Times article questioned why a tiny minority of cases which need to be covered, and I think need to be covered disproportionately. I think you have a point. We do need to give more focus to the church precisely because it has held itself up as a religious organisation. But if a member of the Ferns Committee report is saying that a tiny minority of cases were involved, why isn't the media at least giving some coverage to the majority of non-clerical abuses? That's all I'm asking.
People are being misled.
And the answer to that is that the issue is not the rapes and abuse themselves. It is the cover-up that facilitated their continuation. There is no other organisation. If you tell me an organisation in Ireland that has,
but how do we know if the media doesn't investigate it? How do we know it's not being covered up?
Well, this is back to your sort of your idea that you don't need evidence for things. And
the media won't investigate
it.
What about the child porn rings? It's in Britain we see the media actually tackling the issue of abuse in the secular world. Child porn rings. Recently, a case of 11 men who were grooming young children in local authorities.
Absolutely.
The British media is investigating this. It's not being investigated in Ireland, so how can you say there's no cover-up? We don't know, because the media isn't investigating it.
Yeah, I just think it is disgraceful to detract attention from a cover-up of...
But who's doing that?
No, I think you're being taken in by the other cover-up.
Nobody is detracting attention. I've said time and time again...
That may or may not exist.
No, I said time and time again, excuse me, that the church abuse and failure to deal with it and cover-up needs to be highlighted. Don't put words in my mouth. The question I am asking is, why does the Irish media only focus on this and not investigate the vast majority of secular abuse cases, and why does it not do that with equal vigour? That's the question I'm asking.
Well, as part of the media, what have you done on your show to expose those issues?
Give me the resources. Give me a fraction of the resources that Primetime Investigates have, and I will investigate it. RTE have a monopoly of investigative resources in this country, thanks to a very biased and skewed broadcasting policy. I promise you give me 10% of the resources that Primetime have, and I'll go after all of them, clerical and non-clerical, with equal vigour.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. I'm quite happy to hear that.
And I won't be let down by groupthink.
Well, that is the problem. It's groupthink in the media.
Yeah, but there is a wider issue though, that if you have an institution that effectively wrote the constitution of the state, that imposed a repressive morality that was obsessed with sexuality for decades on the Irish people, that was simultaneously covering up.
I don't find morality of the church repressive in any way. I find it freeing
of children. That's free. And gave.
Can I just turn the conversation in another direction? One of the things that Stephen Hawkins has said is that people who believe in God are less than intelligent than those who don't.
So Albert Einstein.
Can I suggest that Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, both of whom were fervent believers, critical believers, but believers, might disprove that the greatest scientists in the world have actually been religious believers?
Mark, you're taking quotes of somebody and you're actually ascribing them an ordinance that they don't deserve. The fact of the matter is, just because somebody says something doesn't give it a particular cogency or a particular
Stephen
fact.
Hawkins did
Stephen
say
Hawkins
that people who believe in God are less intelligent than those who don't.
He may have said it, but it doesn't mean that it's actually true. So what? Stephen Hawking said it.
I'm asking Michael, does he agree with them?
It's clearly not. It's clearly not true.
Michael,
it's an absurdity.
Well, actually, it's not necessarily an absurdity. There are correlations between education levels and disbelief in gods. You're seriously misquoting Einstein. Einstein's God was a metaphor, and Einstein specifically said that he found the idea of a personal anthropomorphic God, which is the God that most Christians are talking about, a personal God with whom you can have a relationship, to be something that he couldn't take seriously at all.
Well, I agree with Einstein on that particular definition. I think that's what I'm standing for, and I told you that I actually do believe in a God, but it's not an interfering God, or it's not a personal God that interferes with what's going on in this.
I wish we had a secular state. I wish we had a secular state that didn't interfere with us and tax us out of existence.
The greatest minds believe.
Now, some of the texts from listeners. Bill is right about the Anglican faith. Shame on our broadcasters for not knowing this. Well,
people are hugely biased in relation to Anglicanism.
All I can say, Texter,
it's got a very convoluted history.
Nobody is biased towards Anglicanism. We're simply stating...
You are grossly biased about Anglicanism. You don't actually understand how it is where it is today.
Bill, you're misrepresenting what I said. I said it is a Protestant faith. Read the Act of Settlement. That's what it states itself to be. I'm merely describing it. Greg says
it is neither a Protestant entirely nor Catholic entirely.
Greg says
it's an amalgam.
Greg says if you don't want to be part of the state, leave it. Well, Greg, I don't know that people should have to be forced out of their own country because of state incompetence. I think that the people belongs to the people of the country, not to, the country belongs to the people of the country, not the state. Simple. Another texter says the atheist gentleman is very disrespectful when speaking about religious beliefs. This is an example of intolerance. Well, I think in fairness, Michael Nugent would simply say that he's being honest about what he thinks of other religions, and that honesty is in many cases refreshing. We'll be back with more of your texts after this break.
Coleman at Large on Newstalk 106 to 108.
Catholicism a reasonable faith? Really? The Spanish Inquisition? Purgatory? Limbo? ? Says one texter. But Colin in Bray says he thinks that history will show this Eucharistic Congress was a significant turning point in the renewal of the Church due to the positive and surprising images of beauty of the Church. Donal, I couldn't help you were nodding your head at a text that I read out, which even, I think most Catholics will be extremely sceptical about, and that is the text from Dara, who suggests that some hosts have been scientifically examined and that they seem to contain something other than bread.
Yeah, and it's really a sign of how poorly we're communicating the faith that most Catholics don't know about this. But there are numerous what we call miracles of the Eucharist. There's one in Lanciano in Italy where the host was transformed physically, right, scientifically, from bread into they didn't know what. Now, in the 20th century, hundreds of years after the miracle took place, scientific tests were performed and they found the material was myocardial, human myocardium.
Right. But there's also a lot of allegations that many of the so-called miracles and relics were in fact fraudulent. I mean, the Turin shroud, isn't that from the 12th century?
Oh my goodness. Again, you see, this isn't being reported. Even the London Independent, right, ran an article on the latest research on the Turin shroud, saying that scientists, researchers had said that the image was miraculous. The best explanation they had was a non-scientific explanation, was the resurrection, right? Now, I mean, if secular newspapers are reporting headlines like that, we really have to look at the facts. You see, there seems to be this argument, the false argument here, false dichotomy between, science on the one hand and faith on the other. That's not true. If you really investigate, if you go after the scientific facts, the evidence, you'll find it. You'll find being an atheist is a very uncomfortable place to be, and a lot of people have converted from a position of genuine skepticism, where they have examined people who, for example, have studied the Shroud of Turin.
Michael, the London Independent is not what I would have thought, wouldn't have described it as the stormtroopers of the Catholic right. It's a fairly secular liberal publication, isn't it?
Look, the situation with regard to science and faith is that we have a history of religious explanations for things constantly 100% being overtaken by scientific explanations.
Not at all. I've just pointed out.
Just finish the point. What you're talking about is, first of all, extremely improbable. Secondly, even if it was the case that some form of but from what I understand, you're talking about something hundreds of years ago being tested hundreds of years later.
Being tested today.
That contamination of any material by any other material could produce any results that are scientifically explainable.
No,
but
they're not.
That doesn't mean even if hypothetically you granted that there are unusual things that happen that have not yet been explained, which happens regularly in science. Science just adjusts and says, okay, now we understand something new that we didn't understand before. It doesn't have any bearing on whether or not the creator of the universe exists or did this, that or the other.
It is very challenging. If you are genuinely empirical and you go into this, if you look at something like the tilma of Our Lady of Guadalupe, right? Here was an image that was formed hundreds of years ago, and it's only in the last 50 years that technology has developed to the extent where you can look at the images in the eye, in the pupil, right, in this image, and you see the reflection of people in the room. That was not possible to see, 500 years ago. So what you're finding now is modern technology is actually revealing the extent of the miracle that people believed in.
All right,
before.
let me bring Bill in. Bill, do you, as a man of science, rule out the possibility that at some stage what you might be very sceptical or hostile to, the idea of miracles and apparitions, could at some point be rationalised and maybe reconciled with scientific proof?
There's two things. I'm not hostile to anything. I just need to keep sceptical and keep honest about what I'm actually observing. I'm not hostile. I am saying that I agree with Michael Nugent that as we go in science, we're nowhere near the end of science. We're continuously evolving and changing the story in everything to do with biology and science. Everything to do with it. We are learning. We are in a constant adventure and learning. And that's why I believe that all of these things that require the suspension of your critical beliefs to believe them are fundamentally wrong. It's very, very nice for people to believe that there's a life hereafter and there's a heaven and there's a hell for the good guys and the bad guys, and does evil exist when it clearly does its part, and does goodness exist? It clearly does. There's also the huge academic work in psychology that means that suggestion and the power of the mind, which is not fathomed yet, has all to come. There is an endless amount of research and discovery to happen in science. We've moved a hell of a long way.
On that point, isn't it fair to say the theory of relativity was upheld as absolute? It's recently now come back into question.
No, it's been re-upheld. That's the point. It's been shown that it's not true. You're talking about the CERN experiment.
You'll have to...
Mark, you have to be scientifically accurate.
Bill, you have to let me ask questions and let other people come in without interrupting all the time.
Don't mislead the public.
Scientists still don't really have a handle on the fundamental unit of matter. They have models of subatomic particles, but we don't yet have the final picture of how subatomic physics works. A lot of it is based on an idea, an idealization. It's not necessarily hard truth yet.
Yeah, look, there's no such thing as hard truth in science. All that science can do is
that's all I was saying.
But yeah, of course, but that's not in dispute. Scientists, it's religious people that claim to have truth.
So there is no hard truth in science. That's all I was saying.
No, of course there isn't. What science does is it moves closer and closer towards the truth by discounting theories that have been shown by experiment repeatedly to be not consistent with the evidence.
Okay.
And if, first of all, what you're saying there about the theory of relativity, that there was speculation that might have been the case. It has now been shown that it was measurement error in the machines.
P equals MC squared is now upheld.
But hypothetically, even if it had been the case that what you had said had happened, science would have reacted by just saying, "Oh right, well now we've learned something new." It wouldn't have retreated into insisting that what we used to believe was correct because somebody wrote it down in the past.
But Bill, in the words of Michael Nugent of Atheist Ireland, if there is no hard truth in science, how can science have any claim, any superiority over truth over religion? Religion doesn't claim to be based on facts.
There are truckloads of hard truths in science, but what scientists accept is that in the eventuality of any so-called hard truth being found experimentally to be incorrect, scientists are willing to accept that and try and discover why is it incorrect and try and discover the real truth. In other words, they're not arrogant enough to say that we have the absolute truth on anything. We are inching all the time towards a greater truth, and that's all science is about.
But you can't use science as evidence that there is no God, because you're dealing with a different area. It's apples and oranges.
Somebody described the debate between science and religion like organising a fight between an elephant and a whale.
Actually, it's not a fight at all. I mean, the people who are fighting
define it.
No, Mark, the people who are fighting are the religious.
All right, okay.
By the way, just on that point, the reason that science is more reliable than religion as a way of understanding reality is that it constantly provides models that by repeated testing show to be consistently correct. Religion doesn't.
All right. Okay. Joseph says, well, first of all, one texter says, outrageous, how dare you, Coleman, don't categorise Anglicans. As you are doing so, no doubt this text will not be aired due to your totalitarian agenda. Well, you're wrong on that. I simply say to you, texter, go and read the Act of Settlement. I don't define the Anglican Church. Read the Act of Settlement. I'm simply reading what's in there. Joseph says, St. Padre Pio and the thousands and thousands of miracles that came through him and the other saints, there is nothing like that in the other faiths. The proof is there, but there are none so blind than those who do not want to see. Weren't there not serious question marks, Donal, over Padre Pio and these alleged
another RTE,
wounds?
Biased documentary I think you're referring to there. There are a lot of verified reports, not just about the wounds, but not just improbable, as Michael was saying, phenomenon.
Do you have evidence of any bias in RTE? I mean, aren't they right to question this? Shouldn't we be
Father
suspicious?
Reynolds, I think, is some evidence.
Well, that's a separate case, but shouldn't we be suspicious when the speed with which, for example, you see in a town where Padre Pio grows up, you see all the souvenir merchants gathering? It's a bit of a money spinner. I hate to be cynical, but couldn't you suspect that?
And at a more sinister
level, a lot
level,
of people want this to be seen to be the truth because they can make money out of it.
At a more sinister level, isn't this what happened in the church with regard to child abuse? I mean, it was a great place to hide if you were a child abuser.
You can't compare this now. They're two very different cases.
Well, we're talking about something which is true and genuine, and then people wanting to make a quick buck of it, right? Or to use something which is good. If you go to Lourdes, right? There's wonderful prayer, right, in the grotto. You go outside the grotto, and you'll be ripped off, basically.
All right. Okay. Alan Clark says that you can't be serious about criticising the church. If you're not religious, Congress has nothing to do with you. I think he's suggesting that people who don't want to participate in the Congress shouldn't complain about it. Perhaps they should just ignore it. We'll see whether or not it's going to be the large event that some people expect. How many do you think will show up, Donal?
I'm not sure. I mean, it will be what it will be. The great thing about it is that the church is reaching out. I mean, you would have given, what's happened, all the appalling things that have been done, and also the appalling coverage of the appalling things that have been done. A lot of which has been really reprehensible.
Yeah, but you accept, don't you? You accept Michael's point that we do have to give proportionately more.
I agree.
Coverage
Absolutely.
to the church, because of the cover-up and also because of it has held itself up as a moral. It's the extent of how disproportionate.
In fact, it's precisely because we think so much of priests that it's such a story.
Yeah.
When it goes wrong.
It's just incredible that the other side of the abuse story is not covered at all.
Why does Donal say that that the coverage was reprehensible? He's just used that expression.
Did you use that?
Yeah, it's reprehensible because it is letting down 97% of abuse victims. It's like telling them your abuse isn't that important. It's only really important if you've been abused by a priest.
Do you want to come back on that?
Unbelievable is all I'll say. I let the listeners to make their own judgment on that last comment.
You're saying that the 97%...
No, I'm saying that that's the definition of reprehensible, because somebody else doesn't get done for a crime perpetrated on them, that the coverage is reprehensible is inherently
absurd. Shouldn't the media cover all cases?
Of course they should, Mark. You and I have
said that long time ago. That an organisation or somebody representing a particular belief that is covering up should respond to that on the basis that they do it too.
Absolutely, but that's not the response. The point is not who does what. The point is the media's role in exposing all suffering and not simply focusing on one type of suffering for a political motive.
So we get the truth.
That's the
point.
We're
not being unfair.
Exactly.
We're not letting down children. Many who've grown up.
Anyway, I think we're talking at cross purposes, so we're going to go to a break and we'll have more of your texts after that. Keep them coming in on 53106 at 30 cents a text.
Coleman at Large on Newstalk 106 to 108.
Well, we do have the papers in, and there is interesting coverage on page 13 of the Irish Times, which we do have on various aspects of what we were talking about earlier today. that according to Paddy Agnew, the Pope relies on just a handful in the Vatican for Ireland policy. A small number of advisors hold the power in the Holy See. And in recent years, the Irish bishops have been summoned for crises meetings with the Pope, and he has written a highly unusual pastoral letter to the Catholics of Ireland. And the Vatican is described by Paddy as having sent the heavy brigade from headquarters for an apostolic visitation to Ireland. My historical understanding, Donal, is that this has all happened before. Back in 1165, wasn't the shambolic state of the church in Ireland, marriage amongst priests, polygamy, widespread, straying from the rules of the church, wasn't that the reason why the Pope of the day, Pope Adrian, gave the English king permission to invade here? Because apparently the Irish Catholic Church was totally chaotic and straying from the faith.
That rings something of a bell, but I'm not sure.
Is this happening again?
I do think that the piece by Patsy McGarry, though, should be noted, because Patsy McGarry has on the same page in the Irish Times,
doubting Catholics, not catechized.
Not catechized in doctrine, talking about transubstantiation. So I think that people who are interested in this subject could glean a little bit of information, accurate information. But Patsy McGarry is an excellent religious affairs journalist in the Irish Times.
Well, we invited him on today, and he was unfortunately said he was too busy.
Very negative tenor to his articles generally.
Well, we were hoping that
there was one very interesting point about it recently.
But he has a point, because if there was a catechism, wasn't there, in the 60s and 70s, you were told the rules of the road.
Yeah.
And that was all done away with in the 60s, the late 60s, isn't it?
No, it was there when I was in school, and you were in school. Yeah.
70s was done away with.
Yeah.
When was the catechism dropped?
I would say, it wasn't that it was dropped entirely, but the new system of catechetics, it took the focus away exclusively from the catechism, and it became discussions. How do you feel? What's happening in your life? And a lot of young people really were let down because they weren't told, some of the basic truths. And I think that's one of the main problems here. It's not so much that people are rejecting transubstantiation. They haven't actually been taught it in the first place. I know for myself there were some, basic truths that I didn't know about well into my 30s, and I was going, how did I go through a Catholic school with religion classes,
I remember that famous quote from Father Ted, I can't remember which episode, when he turns around to Dougal and he says, Dougal, the great thing about Catholicism is it's also vague and nobody really knows what it means.
And unfortunately in the 70s there's a lot of truth.
The one guy who got the whole lot right was Dave Allen, who used to finish every programme with, "May your God go with you," and wasn't he correct?
Coleman at Large on Newstalk 106 to 108.